He wasn't breathing. That's the first thing I thought when my Uncle Gerald went completely still at the Thanksgiving table. Not angry, still, not embarrassed still, but the kind of still that makes you reach for your phone to dial 911. He had just finished calling my 8-year-old daughter worthless in front of 14 family members. The turkey hadn't even been carved all the way down to the bone yet, and I had just played his exact words back through the small recorder my daughter had been carrying in her pocket. And then the doorbell rang. And the man standing on the other side of it was someone my Uncle Gerald had spent the better part of 2 years pretending did not exist. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Some people in my family still believe I went too far that evening. After everything you are about to hear, I genuinely want to know what you think. Because I have run it back through my mind hundreds of times since November, and every single time I reach the same conclusion. I did not go far enough, fast enough, and the only person at that table who behaved with any real dignity was the 8-year-old girl who kept eating her mashed potatoes while her great uncle announced to the room that she would never amount to anything. Her name is Lily. She is mine legally, completely, in every way that matters, and she has been mine since a Tuesday morning in March 6 years ago when a judge signed the adoption order and she grabbed my hand so hard my ring left a mark on my palm for 3 days. I am Nora Scott. I am 38 years old. And this is the story of the Thanksgiving that changed everything. Let me take you back to where this actually started. Not the dinner, not the recorder, not the doorbell. All of that was the end of something. To understand the end, you need to understand the beginning, and the beginning is my Uncle Gerald Fitch, my father's older brother, the self-appointed patriarch of a family that has never once elected him to that position. Gerald Fitch is 67 years old. He retired early from a regional insurance company, where he worked as a mid-level claims adjuster for 29 years. And somewhere along the way, he decided that a pension and a paid-off house in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio made him an authority on how everyone else in the family should be living their lives. He has a wife, my Aunt Connie, who is technically kind, but who has spent 4 decades perfecting the art of looking in a completely different direction whenever Gerald does something that requires a witness. They have one biological son, my cousin Derek, who is 32 and works in commercial real estate and has never once looked at me without a kind of competitive inventory in his eyes, like he's calculating exactly what I'm worth and comparing it to what he thinks I should be worth. My father passed away when I was 26. After that, Gerald appointed himself the head of anything involving the family name, and my mother, who was grieving and exhausted and genuinely believed that family unity required a certain amount of tolerance, let him. That was the first mistake. Not hers, just the first one in a long line that led to that Thanksgiving table. I need to tell you about Lily before I tell you about anything else, because she is the whole point of this. Lily came to me through foster care when she was 2 years old. Her biological parents had their rights terminated by the court, and she was placed with me as a single foster parent after I completed the certification process and passed every home study and background check the agency required. I was 30 years old. I had a good job, a stable apartment, and absolutely no idea what I was doing, and I loved her completely from the first afternoon. She fell asleep in my car on the way back from the agency, and I had to sit in the parking garage for 45 minutes because I could not figure out how to get her out of the car seat without waking her up. Gerald never approved of the adoption. He made this clear in the particular way that people make things clear when they don't want to be held accountable for saying them directly. Comments at the edges of conversations. Questions that weren't really questions. A consistent and exhausting pattern of referring to Lily as the child, rather than by her name, even after she was legally my daughter and had been living with me for 2 years. He asked me once at a family birthday party when Lily was 4 whether I had considered what it would mean for the family long term. I asked him what he meant. He said he just wanted to make sure I had thought it through. I told him I had. He nodded the way people nod when they disagree but don't want a confrontation, and then he went to get more potato salad. That was the pattern for years. Not outright cruelty, not yet. Just this constant low hum of disapproval that everyone could hear and nobody acknowledged. My mother heard it. My aunt heard it. Derek definitely heard it, because Derek has never once missed an opportunity to align himself with whoever he perceived to have the most power in a room. But nobody said anything, because saying something would have required acknowledging that the thing was happening, and this family has always preferred the clean surface to the honest conversation. If you have ever been counted out by someone who should have known better, who should have looked at your life and seen what you were building and chosen, deliberately, to see something lesser instead, then you know exactly what that particular silence feels like. It is not the silence of being ignored. It is the silence of being assessed and found inconvenient. I want to tell you about a specific afternoon in September, about 14 months before the Thanksgiving dinner. Lily was in second grade. She had just started at a new school because we had moved. I had bought a house, a real house with a yard and a garage, and a neighborhood where kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on, and moving meant a new school district. Lily was nervous about the new school in the way that 7-year-olds are nervous. She didn't say she was nervous, she just stopped eating breakfast and started asking me every morning whether her teacher seemed nice. I told her yes, every time, even on the days I hadn't actually spoken to the teacher, because the answer she needed was yes. Gerald called me that September afternoon while I was in my car in the school pickup line. He called to tell me, in the careful tone he uses when he believes he is delivering important news, that Derek had just been offered a position with a larger real estate firm downtown and that the family was very proud. I said that was wonderful. Gerald then pivoted the way he always pivots to asking how I was managing everything: the job, the house, Lily's new school situation. I told him we were managing well. He said, well, you know, Nora, that child is going to have needs you might not be prepared for as she gets older. Socially, developmentally. These things can be complicated. I said, what things, Gerald? He said, you know, background, history. It's a lot for one person to take on alone. I did not tell him that I had, the previous week, met with a financial advisor named Robert Osai at a downtown firm and formally established a 529 education savings account in Lily's name, with an initial deposit and an automatic monthly contribution, already growing quietly toward whatever university she might want to attend in a decade. I did not tell him that I had also, that same week, spoken with my attorney about formalizing Lily's legal name change to Scott, which had already been completed in the adoption, but which I was now making sure was reflected on every document she would ever need. I just told Gerald that Lily was doing beautifully and that I appreciated his concern. That night I put Lily to bed and she asked me if her new teacher had seemed nice and I said absolutely, and she fell asleep in about 4 minutes the way only children can, and I sat in the hallway outside her door for a little while just listening to the specific quiet of a house where a child is sleeping safely inside it. And I thought, nobody gets to call this complicated except me, and I have already decided it is not. That was my first micro victory, not dramatic, not visible. But mine, the second incident I need to tell you about happened at Christmas, the same year, when the whole family gathered at Gerald and Connie's house the way we did every December. Lily had made a Christmas card for everyone. She was in that phase where she wanted to make everything by hand, where she would sit at the kitchen table with construction paper and glue sticks and work with absolute seriousness on something for 45 minutes, and then hand it to you like it was a deed to property. She had made Gerald and Connie a card that had a green tree drawn in crayon and glitter that she had applied generously and without restraint, and she carried it in her lap in the car the whole drive there, protecting it from imaginary damage. Gerald opened it, looked at it for approximately 2 seconds, said, "How nice," and set it on the side table next to the television where it immediately got covered by Derek's coat. Lily watched this happen. She didn't say anything. She went to find my cousin's kids to play with because she is genuinely good at redirecting herself, and I stood there watching the card disappear under Derek's coat, and I felt something in my chest go very tight. Connie caught my eye from across the room. She looked at the coat covering the card. Then she looked away. That was her tell. She always looked directly at the problem and then directly away from it, like she could inoculate herself against responsibility by making brief visual contact and then withdrawing. Later that evening, Gerald made a toast at dinner. He talked about family legacy. He talked about what the Fitch name had meant in terms of building something real. He looked at Derek when he said it. He did not look at me or Lily. Lily was sitting next to me eating a dinner roll and had absolutely no idea she was being excluded from the category of people who built real things, because she was 7 years old and had the good sense to be more interested in the dinner roll. I excused myself after dinner, went to the bathroom, and called my attorney, Elena Vasquez, and left a voicemail that just said, "Elena, it's Nora. I want to schedule time in the new year to go over everything we discussed in October. All of it." She called me back the next morning. The third incident, and this one matters because it is the one that moved me from a general awareness of Gerald's contempt to a specific and documentary knowledge of it, happened in April of the following year. Lily was 8 by then. She had started an after-school science club at her new school, and she was, I am not exaggerating, obsessed with it. She came home every Tuesday talking about experiments and hypotheses, and the scientific method in the particular way that children explain things when they have just learned them and want to make sure you understand how important they are. I loved it completely. I made the mistake, which I recognized as a mistake approximately 30 seconds after I made it, of mentioning Lily's science club at a family dinner at my mother's house. Gerald looked at Lily across the table and said, "Science club. What do you want to be, a little scientist?" And Lily said with complete sincerity, "I want to study marine biology." And Gerald laughed, not a warm laugh, a dismissive one. He said, "Marine biology, well, let's be realistic." And then he went back to his food. Lily went quiet, not sad quiet, not crying quiet, just the kind of quiet that a child learns to wear when an adult has made them feel small and they do not yet have the language to say why. She ate her dinner. She didn't bring up the science club again at that table. I watched my mother. My mother was looking at her plate. I watched Connie. Connie was refilling her water glass. I watched Derek. Derek was nodding slightly, the way he always nods when Gerald says something Derek would never say himself but absolutely agrees with. I did not say anything at the table. But on the drive home with Lily in the back seat, I asked her what she thought about what Uncle Gerald had said. She thought about it for a second and then she said, "He doesn't know anything about marine biology." And I said, "You're absolutely right, baby, he doesn't." And she went back to looking out the window at the streetlights going by. That night, after she was in bed, I called Alina Vasquez. Not a voicemail this time, she picked up, because Alina has always been someone who picks up. I told her I needed to move faster on the documentation we had discussed. She asked me how fast. I told her as fast as the process would allow. She said she would have the initial filings ready within 3 weeks and that I should come in on a Thursday, because Thursdays were when her calendar had real space in it. I went in on a Thursday in late April. Alina Vasquez has been a family law attorney for 16 years. She has an office on the fourth floor of a building downtown, with 2 windows and a wall of bookshelves and the kind of unhurried manner that makes you feel, the moment you sit down across from her, that whatever you're carrying is manageable. She reviewed everything we had been building over the previous 7 months. The adoption paperwork, fully finalized and cross-referenced with every relevant jurisdiction. The education savings account documentation. The trust structure we had been discussing, which established Lily's long-term financial security through a trustee arrangement, me as primary, with a named successor, that was now formally drafted and ready for my signature. There was also something else on Alina's desk that Thursday. A document I had requested in January, one that Alina had been quietly researching. A formal title inquiry into a piece of property that Gerald Fitch had been managing on behalf of my late father's estate. A property that, according to the paperwork my father had left behind, was supposed to have been handled in a specific way. A way that, according to Alina's research, had not happened. Alina set the inquiry results in front of me and let me go through them. Then she said, very calmly, "There are some questions here that will need answers eventually. Do you want to pursue that alongside the other matters or separately?" I told her I wanted to pursue it. She made a note. She did not seem surprised. I left Alina's office that Thursday afternoon with signed documents in a sealed envelope, a follow-up appointment scheduled for 6 weeks later, and the particular lightness of someone who has done something that cannot be undone and has decided that is exactly what they intended. The preparation phase, as I now think of it, covered roughly 8 months. During those 8 months, I met with Alina 4 times and with Robert Osai, my financial advisor, twice. Robert had, by the time of our second meeting, confirmed that the education savings account was performing well and had reviewed the broader trust structure to make sure everything was coordinated from a financial planning standpoint. He is a precise and careful man who speaks in complete sentences and never makes you feel like a question is stupid. And he spent about 40 minutes on our second visit walking me through the way the trust documents worked in plain language so that I understood every single piece of it. I appreciated that. I took notes. What I had not done in those 8 months was tell anyone in my family any of it, not my mother, not my aunt, certainly not Gerald or Derek. My closest friend, a woman named Sasha Okonkwo, who has been my person since we were in graduate school together and who knew absolutely everything, told me in September that I had the most controlled poker face she had ever seen on a human being. I told her it wasn't a poker face, it was just patience. She said those were the same thing. She might have been right. The close calls were real, though. Let me tell you about the first one. It was October, about 6 weeks before Thanksgiving. My mother had a small dinner at her house, just Gerald and Connie, Derek and his wife Margaret, my mother, and me and Lily. My mother had made pot roast, which she makes well, and the dinner was going fine in the way that dinners in this family go fine. Politely, with the topics that cause disagreement kept carefully off the table, like plates you've decided not to use. Derek had been asking me, in recent months, about my work situation. He asked it the way people ask about a car they suspect is having mechanical trouble, concern sounding but actually hoping to confirm the worst. I had told him consistently that work was going well, which was true. I work in commercial insurance, specifically in risk assessment for mid to large businesses, and I had in the previous fiscal year brought in more revenue than I had in any prior year. But I did not tell Derek this, because Derek's interest in my work situation was not about me. It was about calibrating his own position in the family hierarchy, and I had no interest in calibrating that for him. At dinner that October evening, Derek brought up property. He was talking about a commercial deal he had been involved in, something about a warehouse conversion, and he said casually while reaching for the bread, "Hey, Nora, you ever think about what happened to Dad's property portfolio? The one Gerald's been handling?" The table shifted. Not physically, but I felt it. My mother looked at the pot roast. Connie's hand went to the necklace she always wears, a small gold chain with a cross on it. Gerald put his fork down just for a half second, then picked it up again. I looked at Derek. "What made you think about that?" I asked. He shrugged. "Just came up. Someone mentioned estate stuff and I thought about it. You were named in the trust documents, right? Dad's estate stuff?" "There are documents," I said. "Elena Vasquez handles all of that for me. She keeps me informed." The name landed the way I knew it would. Gerald picked up his fork again but didn't use it. He looked at me with the specific expression of someone who has just realized the person across from them knows more than they expected. "Elena Vasquez," Derek repeated. "She's a family law attorney, right?" "Among other things," I said and passed him the bread. The conversation moved on. My mother said something about the pot roast needing more time, which it didn't. Connie agreed with her. Gerald ate. But I noticed for the rest of that dinner that Gerald did not look at me directly again. He looked at the space slightly to my left, which is what Gerald does when he is thinking about something he doesn't want to think about out loud. Lily, who had been eating quietly through all of this, looked up at me at one point and said, "Mom, can I be excused? I want to look for a book." I said, of course, and she took her plate to the kitchen counter the way I had taught her, and then disappeared down the hall toward my mother's bookshelf, which she raids every time we visit. Nobody at that table was aware that my 8-year-old daughter had any particular consciousness of the adult conversation happening around her. They saw a child leaving the table to find a book. They were not paying close enough attention. The second close call happened 3 weeks later, at a coffee meeting that Gerald called specifically to discuss, as he put it, family financial matters. He had called my mother and suggested it, and my mother had called me and said she thought it might be a good idea for all of us to sit down together. I agreed because agreeing was the strategic choice. Refusing would have told him something. Agreeing told him nothing. We met at a coffee shop near my mother's neighborhood on a Saturday morning. Gerald arrived first, which he always does because arriving first is a way of establishing authority. My mother arrived with Connie. Derek came alone. Margaret had declined, which I noted. I came with a notebook and a cup of coffee, and the expression of someone who is simply glad to see their family. Gerald had brought what he described as some documents, a manila folder with papers that he slid onto the table in front of my mother with a kind of deliberate casualness. He said he wanted to go over where things stood with the property that had been part of my father's estate, specifically a rental property in a suburb of Columbus that my father had purchased in the late 90s and which had been generating rental income since then. Gerald had been managing this property as the named executor of certain parts of my father's estate for the past 12 years. He presented numbers, a summary of expenses, maintenance costs, periods of vacancy. He said the property had performed below expectations in recent years and that he had made certain decisions about the management of those funds in the interest of protecting the estate's value. He looked at my mother when he said this, and my mother nodded, because my mother has always found it easier to nod than to ask the question. I opened my notebook to a blank page. I did not open the manila folder he had pushed toward me. Gerald noticed. "Don't you want to look at those?" he said. "I've seen the property records," I said. "Elena forwarded them to me last month. I just have a couple of questions." Connie's hand went to her necklace. Gerald went very still, not the concerning kind of still from later, but the careful kind, the calculating kind. "What kind of questions?" Derek asked. He was watching me with something I hadn't seen before in his eyes, not contempt this time, something closer to caution. "Just administrative things," I said. "Elena wanted me to ask about the formal accounting for fiscal year 2022 specifically. She's cross-referencing some dates." I paused. "Nothing urgent, just paperwork." Gerald picked up his coffee cup, took a sip, set it back down. His movements were slightly too deliberate, the way movements get when someone is forcing them to be deliberate. "I can have my accountant pull that together," he said. "That would be great," I said. "Elena's timeline is flexible. She just needs it before the end of the year. My mother was looking between us with the expression of someone watching a tennis match in a language they don't fully speak. Connie was stirring her coffee even though she had already stirred it. Derek had stopped looking at me entirely and was studying the table. The coffee meeting ended about 40 minutes later. Nothing was resolved. Nothing was supposed to be resolved. It was a scouting mission, and everyone at that table knew it, but only I knew the results. I called Alina from the parking lot. She picked up on the second ring. He brought a folder, I told her. Did you take it? She said. No. Good, she said. Did you mention the fiscal year 2022 records? I did. And he said he'd have his accountant pull them. There was a brief pause on her end. Okay, that tells us something. I'll file the formal financial disclosure request Monday morning. Once that's submitted, he'll know the clock is running. Another pause. Nora, are you ready for this to move faster? I sat in my car in the parking lot of that coffee shop, and I thought about Lily asking me every morning whether her teacher seemed nice. I thought about the Christmas card disappearing under Derek's coat. I thought about Gerald's voice at the dinner table saying, let's be realistic, to an 8-year-old who wanted to study the ocean. Yes, I said, I'm ready. Alina filed the formal financial disclosure request the following Monday, November 4th. She did not tell me the exact hour she filed it, but she sent me a confirmation message that afternoon that said simply, done, the clock is running. Thanksgiving was 20 days away. Gerald had already called my mother to confirm he was hosting. He had already called me separately to make sure Lily and I were coming, which in retrospect tells you something about what he was planning. People who are about to be caught tend to want their audience assembled in advance. I bought Lily new shoes for the holiday. She chose them herself, dark green with a small bow on the toe. She was very serious about the selection process. We went to 3 stores. On the drive home, she asked me if Thanksgiving was going to be fun, and I told her it was going to be memorable. She seemed satisfied with this answer, in the particular way that children are satisfied when they sense that an adult has given them a true answer that they don't yet have all the context to understand. I want to tell you about the recorder, because people always ask about the recorder. Lily is curious about everything. This is the essential fact of her personality, the thing that makes her science club membership feel so inevitable. She had found a small digital voice recorder in a drawer of my desk, something I had used years ago for recording notes during long commutes, and she had become mildly fascinated with it. She used it to record herself doing science experiment narrations, pretending she was a host of a nature documentary. She would walk through the backyard describing what she observed, the condition of the grass, what the birds were doing, the state of the garden in autumn, in the serious, precise voice she had been practicing. It was wonderful. I have recordings of this that I will keep for the rest of my life. She had gotten in the habit of keeping the recorder in her pocket on days when she thought she might observe something worth documenting. It was not a plan I devised. It was not something I told her to do. It was simply what an 8-year-old girl who loves science and nature documentaries and the precise documentation of observable facts does when she goes to a family gathering where, in her experience, things worth observing tend to happen. I did not know she had it in her pocket when we drove to Gerald's house on Thanksgiving morning. I found out 20 minutes after we arrived, when she sidled up to me in the kitchen where I was helping my mother with the green beans and said, very quietly, Mom, I'm recording the natural behavior of the family for a documentary. I looked down at her. She had the recorder in her hand, small and silver, and she was looking at me with complete seriousness. I told her, equally seriously, that was a very interesting scientific approach. She nodded and put it back in her pocket and went to find the other kids. I did not stop her. I want to be clear about that. I did not tell her to do it, and I did not stop her when I found out she was doing it. And whether that was a parenting decision I should examine is something I have thought about, and my conclusion is no. A child documenting observable behavior in her natural environment, for her own interest, is not a thing I was going to stop. Everything I had built over those 8 months, the documents, the trust, the education account, the attorney, the financial disclosure request, all of it was about to be tested. All of it was about to walk through the door of Gerald Fitch's dining room and sit down at his table and eat his turkey and wait. The timing could not have been worse from Gerald's perspective. It could not have been better from mine. And I did not know yet, none of us knew yet, about the man who was going to ring the doorbell. Gerald's house smelled like the same pine candle he bought every November, and the table was set the way Connie always set it, centerpiece exactly centered, cloth napkins folded into triangles, the good china that came out twice a year and made everyone nervous about dropping things. 14 people. That was the count that Thanksgiving. Gerald and Connie, Derek and Margaret, my mother, My mother's neighbor fillies who had nowhere else to go, and whom my mother had been quietly adopting for holidays for about 6 years. Gerald's golfing friend Raymond and Raymond's wife whose name I always forgot and had to relearn each time, Beverly. It was Beverly, two of Derek's friends from his real estate office who were apparently also without Thanksgiving plans. A cousin on Connie's side named Tina who drove in from Dayton, and me and Lily. Lily wore the dark green shoes with the bow on the toe. She had insisted on them specifically, with a corduroy dress my mother had given her for her birthday, and she looked wonderful, and she had the recorder in her pocket before we even got out of the car. We arrived at 11:30 in the morning. Gerald greeted us at the door with the heartiness he always performs at family gatherings, the broad smile, the hand on the shoulder, the loud enthusiasm that functions as a kind of covering fire over whatever is actually going on underneath. He looked at Lily and said, "There she is," in the voice adults use when they are performing affection for a child rather than actually feeling it. Lily said, "Hi, Uncle Gerald," the way I had taught her to address him, politely and without expectation. Inside, Connie had coffee and an appetizer spread going, and the house had that specific organized chaos of a big meal being prepared, the kitchen warm and smelling of turkey and sage, Connie moving between the oven and the counter with the efficiency of someone who has hosted this exact meal for 30 years. My mother arrived about 10 minutes after us. She hugged Lily first, which is always the right instinct, and then hugged me, and then went to find Connie. Phyllis arrived behind her carrying a pie she had made herself and holding it like it was a newborn. For the first 2 hours, it was ordinary. That's the thing about days like this, they are ordinary right up until they aren't. Lily went with the kids, which in this case meant the two children of Derek's real estate colleagues, a boy of about 9 and a girl who was maybe 7, and the three of them disappeared into the back room where Gerald kept an old gaming system. I helped Connie in the kitchen. I talked to my mother about her neighbor's fence situation, which had been ongoing for 6 months and had achieved the status of a genuine narrative with its own characters and plot turns. I talked to Beverly about something, a trip she and Raymond were planning, somewhere warm. I was present, I was calm. I had been preparing for 20 days and I felt it not as nerves, but as a kind of stillness, like the hour before a storm when the air stops moving. Derek found me by the appetizer table around 1 in the afternoon. He had a glass of something amber in his hand and the slightly overlaxed posture of someone on his second drink before the meal. "Big year for you?" he offered by way of greeting. "Pretty good year," I told him. He nodded. His eyes did that inventory thing. "Dad was saying you've got a good thing going with the insurance work." "Your dad says that." A slight adjustment in his expression, he had walked into something and he knew it. "He mentions it." "That's kind of him," I said, and turned to put something on my plate, and the conversation ended the way conversations with Derek usually end, inconclusively, with him holding slightly less ground than he started with. The meal was served at 2 in the afternoon. Gerald carved. He always carved, because carving was the kind of ceremonial masculine act that Gerald had organized his self-image around. He did it with a large knife and a lot of narration about the proper technique. Raymond watched with genuine interest. Derek watched with performed interest. Everyone else waited for the turkey. We were about 40 minutes into the meal. The table had reached that particular Thanksgiving rhythm, plates full, conversations scattered across multiple threads. The particular loudness of a group that has been together long enough to stop performing and start actually talking. Lily was next to me, eating the mashed potatoes first, which she always does, and talking quietly to my mother on her other side about something to do with the science club. Gerald cleared his throat. It was a specific sound, the one he made when he was about to make a pronouncement. Several people at the table registered it, the way you register a shift in the weather. "You know," he said, to no one specifically but to everyone, "I've been thinking about the next generation of this family." But he responded. This was not unusual. Gerald often opened with a thesis statement and then waited for silence to function as permission to continue. "Derek's doing tremendous things in commercial real estate." He looked at Derek. Derek sat up slightly straighter. "I'm proud of what he's built. Real foundations, something that lasts." My mother nodded pleasantly. Phyllis ate her turkey. Raymond looked at Gerald with the attentive expression of a man who is a guest in someone else's family story. "But I do worry," Gerald continued, and the word worry is what told me he had decided tonight was the night, "about what we're leaving behind for the ones who come after us. The values, the preparation." He paused. He picked up his fork. And then, in a voice that was not raised but carried perfectly to every corner of the table, he said, "Some children are set up to succeed. And some," he glanced toward Lily with a brief, deliberate look that turned my stomach, "well, some just aren't built for it. That child is worthless. She'll never amount to anything." The word worthless went into my chest like something cold. Lily was eating her mashed potatoes. She kept eating. She didn't put her fork down, didn't look up, didn't change her posture. She just kept eating, quietly, with the focused equanimity of a child who has learned to keep moving through weather she didn't cause. My mother's hand stopped on the table. Not a dramatic gesture, her hand had been reaching for her glass and it just stopped, halfway there, like a machine that had received a conflicting signal. Connie looked at the centerpiece. Derek's wife Margaret, whom I had always found quietly decent in the way that people can be decent when they are not the ones making the decisions, set her fork down very slowly and did not pick it up again. I did not speak. I did not move. I sat with that word, worthless, and I let it do what it needed to do, which was clarify everything. Raymond's wife Beverly made a small sound that was not quite a word. Raymond put his hand over hers. Nobody at the table addressed what had just been said. The conversation didn't resume so much as stagger back to its feet. Someone said something about the stuffing, someone else reached for the rolls, and the table performed the collective amnesia that this family had been performing my entire adult life. We do not acknowledge the thing. We move around it. We pour more wine. I ate. I helped Lily with the cranberry sauce she wanted. I spoke pleasantly to Phyllis about her pie, which she had made with fresh cranberries and which she was rightly proud of. I was at that table, fully present, for exactly 20 more minutes. Then I stood up. I did not make a speech. I did not announce that I was about to do something. I simply stood, in the particular way that makes people in a room look up, not loudly, but with a quality of intention that registers, and I said, I'd like everyone to listen to something for a moment. Gerald, who had been in the middle of saying something to Raymond, stopped. Nora. My mother said my name like a question and a warning at the same time. It'll just take a minute, I told her. I reached across to Lily, who had been watching me with calm, scientific attention. I held out my hand. She understood immediately. She reached into the pocket of her corduroy dress and put the small silver recorder in my palm, and I pressed play. Gerald's voice filled the dining room. His exact voice, his exact intonation, his exact words. That child is worthless. She'll never amount to anything. The recording was clear. Lily had been sitting close enough that every consonant landed. What followed was not a dramatic eruption. It was something quieter and worse. It was 14 people in a room with no place to put what had just been made undeniable. Gerald's face went through several things in quick succession: surprise, calculation, and then a composed anger, the kind that comes from a man who has always been able to define situations on his own terms and is suddenly encountering resistance to that. That is absolutely, he started. And then the doorbell rang. Gerald heard it and stopped speaking. He looked toward the front door, and something in his face changed in a way I had not seen before, not anger this time, not even calculation. Something closer to alarm. His eyes went to Connie. Connie had both hands on the table, flat, very still. I crossed the dining room and opened the front door myself, because it was, in every sense that mattered, already my moment. The man on the porch was in his early 40s in a gray coat, with a badge lanyard around his neck and a briefcase in one hand. His name, as he introduced himself, was Daniel Cho, and he was a caseworker from the County Adoption Services Division. He was looking, he said, for Gerald Fitch. Gerald had risen from his chair. He was standing at the edge of the dining room where it opened into the hallway, and he was looking at Daniel Cho with the expression of someone watching a wall come down. Mr. Fitch, Daniel Cho said, with the practiced evenness of a man who has had many uncomfortable conversations in many doorways, I've been attempting to reach you for several weeks. We have some outstanding matters related to a home study application that require your response. Gerald said nothing. His mouth opened, then closed. If you are still with me, and I need you to stay, because this is the part of the story nobody in my family expected, I have to tell you what Gerald Fitch had been hiding for the better part of 2 years, and why a caseworker from the County Adoption Services Division was standing on his porch on Thanksgiving afternoon. Gerald had filed an application, privately, without telling anyone in the family, to become a licensed foster parent. The stated purpose, which Daniel Cho confirmed to me later, with appropriate professional discretion, was general fostering. But Alina Vasquez, in the course of her research into the property matter, had discovered something else. Gerald had been in communication with a private adoption facilitator about a specific child, a placement he had been pursuing independently, and he had named my father's estate, specifically, the rental property he had been managing, as part of his demonstrated financial stability in the application. A property that, according to Alina's research, he had not had the legal authority to claim as his own asset. He had been using money that belonged, in part, to me, my share of my father's estate, to fund a financial profile for an adoption application. And he had been avoiding the caseworker for 7 weeks because the agency had begun asking questions about his financial disclosures that he could not answer honestly without exposing the entire structure. I did not know all of this at the moment Daniel Cho rang the doorbell. I knew enough. Knew what Alina had told me, and I knew what the financial disclosure request had begun to surface, and I knew that Gerald Fitch had been hiding from this man, and I knew, standing in that doorway, that the hiding was over. I stepped back. I gestured for Daniel Cho to come in. Gerald's voice, when it came, was stripped of every layer of authority he had spent 67 years constructing. This is a family holiday. You cannot come in here, Mr. Fitch. My voice was level. I turned to look at him fully for the first time since I had stood up from the table. He's going to come in, and then you are going to answer his questions. And then I am going to tell everyone at this table what Alina Vasquez found when she reviewed the property records from 2022. The dining room had gone completely still, not the performed kind, not the polite kind. The genuine, structural silence of people who have understood that the ground beneath them is different than it was 5 minutes ago. My mother was gripping the back of her chair. I could see her knuckles from where I stood. Margaret, Derek's wife, had pushed her chair back from the table by about 3 inches. Not enough to stand, just enough to create distance. A small physical declaration of where she stood. Derek was looking at his father with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not the performative agreement, not the aligned confidence. Something rower. Something that looked, under the polished surface, like a young man discovering that the man he'd been modeling himself after was not what he thought. I stepped back into the dining room and let Daniel Cho follow me in. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, Gerald's chair, and I sat down in it. Not to make a point, because my legs were telling me it was time to sit down and that was the nearest chair. Gerald remained standing in the doorway between the hall and the dining room. He looked, for the first time in my memory, small. I want everyone to understand what's happening, I said, not loudly. Conversationally, the way you explain something to people you respect. And I want to start from the beginning, because the beginning is important. I looked at my mother. Dad left a rental property in his estate. Gerald was named executor for certain portions of the estate, which included management of that property. Over the last 12 years, the property has generated income. That income was supposed to be held in trust for the estate and distributed according to Dad's intentions. Elena Vasquez, my attorney, submitted a formal financial disclosure request 3 weeks ago. The records that came back raised questions that Gerald has not answered. I paused. Gerald has also been avoiding the county adoption caseworker who is now standing in this room because Gerald made financial representations in an adoption application that included estate assets he did not have the right to claim. The silence that followed had weight and texture. Gerald found his voice. It was thinner than usual, the way a structure sounds when the load-bearing elements have been compromised. You have no idea what you're talking about. Those records are complicated, there are expenses, there are management decisions that go back years. You can't just, Gerald. Elena Vasquez's voice, from my coat pocket, because I had called her on speakerphone before I stood up from the table, and she had been listening. Every head in the room turned toward the phone I now held up. Mr. Fitch, Elena continued, my office filed a formal legal inquiry into the estate property management records for fiscal years 2020 through 2023 on November 4th. The county court clerk received it. The responding documentation contained a discrepancy of approximately $147,000 in unaccounted rental income over that period. This is not a family matter. This is a matter I will be filing with the court in the next business week, unless there is a full accounting provided before then. A brief pause. I'm happy to discuss the timeline if you'd like to have your own attorney present. Gerald put one hand on the door frame, not a dramatic gesture, the kind of thing a person does when they need something to hold onto. Connie made a sound that was not quite a word, a small exhaled thing, and she put both hands over her mouth and sat very still. $147,000, Derek said, not a question. Just the number, landing somewhere in his chest where it was going to sit for a long time. Approximately, I confirmed. Elena's team is still reviewing 2023. Derek looked at his father. Gerald did not look back at him. Gerald was looking at the phone in my hand with the expression of a man watching something that has been coming for years finally arrive. Raymond, who had been silent throughout all of this, Raymond, the golfing friend, the guest who had no stake in any of it, quietly put his napkin on the table and folded his hands in his lap and looked at the middle distance, the way decent people do when they find themselves witnesses to something they weren't supposed to see. My mother's voice came from the other side of the table. It was very quiet. Gerald, is this true? He didn't answer her. His jaw worked, but no words came out. Is it true? She asked again, and this time there was something in her voice I had not heard before, not grief, not anger. Something harder. The sound of a woman who has been nodding at the head of the table for 12 years and is recalibrating the cost of that nod. There are expenses, Gerald said finally. The maintenance alone, the roof in 2021. Alina has the roof documentation, I said. It accounts for approximately $11,000. The remaining discrepancy stands. He looked at me. And for just a moment, one moment, before the calculation came back into his face, I saw something genuine. Not remorse exactly, more like recognition. Like he was seeing, clearly for the first time, that the woman sitting in his chair at his table had not been the person he had assessed her to be. That all those years of condescension, all those holiday dinners and coffee meetings and pointed silences, had been directed at someone who had been, the entire time, building something he could not see because he had never considered looking. This is my house, he said. The authority he was reaching for was not there anymore. It came out flat. It is, I agreed. And Daniel Cho needs to speak with you about the adoption application. I'd suggest you do that privately. I'd also suggest you call your own attorney tonight. I set the phone on the table. Alina, thank you. Of course, she said, and the call ended. Daniel Cho, who had been standing near the doorway with the careful stillness of a professional who has waited out more volatile rooms than this one, looked at Gerald. Mr. Fitch, whenever you're ready. Gerald straightened. He smoothed the front of his shirt. It was a reflex, the gesture of a man trying to reassemble himself through posture because the internal structure was gone. He looked at Connie. She looked back at him, and then she looked at the table, and she did not look at him again. He walked past me toward the hallway. He did not speak to me. He did not speak to anyone at the table. He followed Daniel Cho into the front room, and after a moment the door pulled mostly shut behind them, and the dining room was left with 13 people and the wreckage of a meal that had started 2 hours ago in ordinary November warmth. Lily, who had been sitting quietly through all of this, looked up at me. Her face was composed. She had the recorder in her hand again. She had apparently retrieved it from where I had set it on the table, and she was turning it over in her fingers the way she does when she's thinking. Mom, she said. Yeah, babe. Is he going to be in trouble? I looked at her for a moment. She was 8 years old. She wanted a straight answer. Yes, I told her. He is. She thought about this. Because of the money thing? Partly because of the money thing. She nodded, seemed to find this satisfactory, and reached across for the rolls. Can I have more butter? I gave her more butter. And I looked around the table, at my mother, who was staring at her plate with the careful, concentrated expression of someone rearranging something large and heavy inside themselves. At Margaret, who was looking at Derek with a question in her eyes that Derek was not ready to answer. At Phyllis, who was watching me with the particular gentle steadiness of someone who has lived long enough to recognize when justice has been served and is just waiting to see how it lands. At Beverly, who was holding Raymond's hand across the table. At Tina from Dayton, who looked like she was already writing the text she was going to send her sister on the drive home. And then I looked at the centerpiece, exactly centered the way Connie always centered it, and I thought, this family will look different after today. Not better, not worse, just different. Some things, once they are said out loud in a room full of people, cannot be unsaid. And some things, once they are known, cannot be unknown. Gerald was in that front room for 41 minutes, I know because I watched the time. When he came back through to the dining room, the meal was largely finished. People had cleared their plates. Connie had started the dishes. Derek was standing by the window with a glass of water, looking out at the yard. Gerald walked through the room without speaking to anyone. He went upstairs. He did not come back down that evening. Daniel Cho stopped in the dining room doorway on his way out. He looked at me with the specific expression of a professional who cannot say everything he knows. Ms. Scott, he said, thank you for your cooperation this evening. Of course, I said. He left. I heard the front door close behind him. My mother came and sat down next to me at the mostly cleared table. She put her hand over mine. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, how long have you known? About the property records? Alina found the first discrepancy in January. 10 months, she absorbed this. And you waited. I had to let the process work, I said. Filing the disclosure through the proper channel was the only way it would hold up. If I had said something at Christmas, he would have had time to adjust the records. The formal request locked the timeline. My mother was quiet for another moment. Then, he said that about Lily. He did, at my husband's table. Her voice was very low. I should have, Mom. I pressed her hand once. You didn't know what I knew, and you couldn't have stopped him from being who he is. She looked at me. Her eyes were bright, not with tears exactly, but with the effort of not having them. Your father would have been so angry. I know, I said. I was angry enough for both of us. Lily came in from the back room then, the gaming system apparently having lost its appeal, and she climbed up into the chair between me and my mother and said she wanted pie. My mother laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, and got up to cut it. I sat there in Gerald's dining room in Gerald's chair and felt something that was not triumph, not quite, but was adjacent to it. The specific satisfaction of a thing completed, of a door closed on something that should have been closed a long time ago. The legal process moved relatively quickly after that, as these things go. Elena filed the full estate accounting claim with the court in the first week of December. Gerald retained his own attorney, a man whose reputation Elena described to me, without additional commentary, as manageable. Gerald's attorney attempted, in the first week of January, to characterize the unaccounted income as reinvested management expenses, a position that lasted approximately one conference call before Alina laid out the documentation trail, and it collapsed. The formal settlement was reached in late February. Gerald repaid the estate the full $147,000 plus interest, which came to approximately $162,000 total, transferred through the estate account under court supervision. My portion of that estate, as confirmed by the probate court's review of my father's actual intentions as documented in the original trust, was slightly over 40%. My attorney managed the distribution through the trust structure she had established, and it went directly into the financial framework she and Robert Ose had built, secured, accounted for, growing. The adoption application was formally withdrawn by Gerald in December, following a finding by the county agency that the financial disclosures in the application contained material inaccuracies. No criminal charges were filed. Alina made a careful decision about this, in consultation with me, based on the fact that the mismanagement, while serious and actionable in civil court, fell into a category where the estate's interests were better served by full financial recovery than by the uncertainty and expense of criminal prosecution. Gerald signed a formal acknowledgement of the civil settlement, and the court recorded it. It is public record. Alina explained to me that if he ever again attempted to mismanage estate property on behalf of any family member, this record would be the first thing any attorney found. What happened to Gerald after February is not something I track closely, because I no longer have reason to. What I know, he and Connie did not attend the family Easter gathering. My mother told me in March that Connie had moved into the guest room at their house, and that Gerald was spending most of his time at Raymond's property, golfing and being, by Raymond's apparently tactful account, quieter than usual. Derek stopped calling me. Not dramatically, he just stopped. His wife Margaret sent me a text in January that said only, "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner for what it's worth." I wrote back, "It's worth something." And I meant it. My mother and I have dinner together every other Sunday now. She calls Lily on her own without coordinating through me, which is new and which I find I love completely. Lily is finishing second grade. She won a science fair ribbon in March, third place, for a project about water filtration that she designed herself, and then rebuilt twice because the first two versions weren't precise enough, her words. The ribbon is on the refrigerator. She asked me sometime in February whether Uncle Gerald was going to come to her birthday in the spring. I told her no. She said, "Oh, okay," and went back to coloring a diagram of a fish's respiratory system she had found in a library book. The science club is still going. The teacher told me at the last parent conference that Lily has a particular gift for forming hypotheses and testing them systematically, and that she asks better questions than most of the fourth graders. I am not surprised. She has been collecting evidence and documenting observable behavior since she was 8 years old. The education savings account is fully funded through her first 4 years of college, and growing. The trust is in place. Everything that belongs to her is protected by documents, by law, by the structural permanence of things done correctly and on the record. I don't think about Gerald much. When I do, it isn't with hatred, it's with something more like the flat assessment you give to a risk that has been identified and contained. He was a problem. I solved the problem. I spent 8 months building the solution while he spent 8 months not looking closely enough to see it coming, because he had decided, long before any of this, that I was not someone worth watching carefully. That was his fundamental error. Not the money was a symptom. The fundamental error was looking at me and seeing nothing. Lily sees things, she documents them. She asks precise questions and she tests her hypotheses and she goes back and rebuilds when the first version isn't good enough. She's going to be extraordinary, and she has been extraordinary, and she will continue to be extraordinary whether Gerald Fitch believes it or not, which is, as of this Thanksgiving, a thing that no longer matters to either of us. So tell me, did I go too far or not far enough? I genuinely want to know what you think.